Hey folks, Doug Blake with Body Design University. In today's video, I'm going to pull you into chapter 21. We're going to take a quick look at table 21.3. This is the summary chart of the OPT model. It is on page 685. Just keep in mind that quite often, as you're going through this textbook, you're going to see a ton of tables, charts, figures. And you might be asking yourself, well, which ones are the most important? Which ones are not as important? Or even, what parts of these particular tables, charts, and figures do I need to memorize for the actual exam? You know, it's funny because I get students will ask me about this table quite often. Now, you know, by the time you get to chapter 21 in this textbook, if you've maintained your sanity, good for you. Congratulations. And the reason is that to get through chapters 11 through 14 and 15, which are very high priority chapters from a testing perspective, tons of material. Generally, by the time you get to chapter 21, you're just mentally fried, right? But I want to help you to kind of understand that this is one of the tables in chapter 21. And there's a couple of other ones, but for the most part, this is one of the critical tables that I tell students to kind of look. And if you can, as best you can, to basically try to memorize. I'm going to explain to you why. It provides a really solid overview of the OPT model. And the point is that if you can understand the basic, in this case, primary adaptations and primary methods of progression, because we know progressions and regressions are important components in the model itself, and you'll be asked any number of questions on the exam. But if you can memorize or get a good gist of just the general components of the OPT model, it'll actually help you, believe it or not, in answering other questions on the exam. It's one of the reasons why, just as an aside, I tell students, go through chapter 2, because chapter 2 also has some interesting information. Even though it's a low priority chapter, it could actually provide some information that will help you later on in the textbook. NASM is not trying to confuse you. They're not trying to throw you off. They're not going to ask you questions that are not solidly grounded in the material. So that's why when I look at table 21.3, the summary chart, it's very helpful. And just again, as another aside, my recommendation is to go to the very back of chapter 21, as I do with pretty much all of these chapters, and look over the chapter highlights, take a quick run through, make sure you understand, because they're going to explain to you the basic elements related to each phase of the OPT model. Remember, there's levels and phases. There's 3 levels: the stabilization, strength, and power levels, and then the different phases. So there's 5 phases, 1 phase in the stabilization level, 3 phases in the strength level, and then one phase in the power level. But here's what I want to do. I just want to kind of explain to you a couple of things that you may get confused on, or if not confused, you may kind of overlook, because quite often the questions that are asked will on the exam will demand from you that you know some precise differences, for instance, between the maximal strength training phase and the power training phase. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to show it to you. I've had students ask me how do I know progressions and regressions, and how do I memorize, or where can I find that information? Believe it or not, some of it can be found right here in this one table. So, and I'm just going to run through it with you and show you some of the things, finer points to this table that you might have missed. Oh, by the way, have some paper that you can take notes on as well. And color, right? Markers, if you want to draw things, it's always a good idea. Level stabilization, or the stabilization level. Phase 1 is stabilization endurance training. Keep that in mind. Stabilization and endurance training. Why is that important? Because the second phase is strength endurance training. I see students getting confused with this all the time, because when you're asked a question related to the phase 1 or phase 2, sometimes the only difference between phase 1 and phase 2 is something as simple as rep scheme, okay, or modality of exercises that you would be using. So make sure you understand that the difference between the first and the second phase, i.e. the stabilization and strength levels, is stabilization endurance. Again, do yourself a big favor. Write this stuff down. Write it over and over and over until, without even looking at it, just you memorize what is the phase 1 terminology. Stabilization, endurance. What's phase 2? Strength and endurance. Okay, of course, phase 3 is muscular development, phase 4 maximal strength, and phase 5 is power. So just keep that in mind. These are some of the nuances that you may just pass over and not really think about it. And then when you get to the question, it can be a little confusing. Primary adaptations. Look for the differences in each of these boxes. Okay, look for the differences. Look for the similarities. Where are going to be the similarities? Generally, in the primary adaptations column, the similarities are going to be for sure down by the strength and power level. So classic example would be the strength level involves strength endurance, muscular development, maximal strength. But look underneath the primary adaptations. What do you notice? Core strength, core strength, core strength. The only difference then would be muscular endurance and prime mover strength. That would be in the strength endurance training phase. Okay. Muscular development training will add to the core strength, which you already saw in phase 2. Muscular strength and hypertrophy. Well, the name of the phase actually tells you exactly what the primary adaptation is. And then, of course, maximal strength training. What are the primary adaptations? Maximal muscle strength. So you can see there are differences and there are similarities. All three of these have core strength as a component or primary adaptation. And then when you move into the power level or the power training phase, you're going to notice the same thing, core strength. So what I'm saying would be a really good idea is that when you look at this table, my recommendation is always to actually rewrite the table, literally draw it out and rewrite it. That will help you memorize it. But while you're doing that, notice that the similarities here between phase 4 and phase 5 is core strength. So if you see a question on the exam, you got to be careful that you don't pick phase 4 when it was phase 5, because what is the difference between phase 4 and phase 5 when it comes to primary adaptations? Well, phase 4, core strength and maximal muscular strength. Because guess what you see in the power? Core strength, maximal muscular strength. It's the same thing. The only difference is that in the power training phase, there's an additional component, and that is the rate of force production. But if you weren't looking for those similarities and those really minor differences, you might not know what you're dealing with. Well, is it phase 4 or phase 5? And that's the way they'll ask these questions. So you're looking for those variables, those elements that are similar between the different phases, and those that have these minor, little variations in the variables that they're listing. Move over to the last column, over to the right, primary methods of progression. This is a critical part of this table and critical part of the OPT model. This is very, very helpful. So I would definitely spend time memorizing this. Phase 1, master the basic movement patterns. Now that is, for the most part, that's the unique differentiator between phase 1 and all the other phases, is basic movement pattern mastering. And that's those different movement patterns that NASM discusses with you, pretty sure throughout this chapter. So the squatting movement, the single leg, pushing, pulling, right? Those are all basic movement patterns. And that's what you have to understand really differentiates, because when you look down this column, you're not going to see that in any of the other phases. And so additionally, now in phase 1, progress exercises proprioceptively, controlled yet unstable. I'm just telling you, you're going to see this in questions that they ask. And they're really simple, basic questions. But if you didn't read this and you did not differentiate between the phases with methods of progression, you might have a little bit of a challenge. So progress exercises proprioceptively, meaning that the exercise movement patterns are controlled yet unstable. Once basic movement patterns are established, increase the complexity of exercises once the basic movement patterns have been established. It's pretty straightforward. Stabilization, endurance training, stabilization, balancing, stabilizing is critical for a new client. And so that's why this is the first phase, stabilization phase. They got to get the movement patterns down, and they have to be able to do it in an unstable scenario so that they can develop proprioceptive capability, right? So that simply means a controlled yet unstable environment and increased complexity of exercises, yada, yada. Now, once you move into the strength level, those 3 phases all have similarities, but yet there are very critical, precise differences. Strength endurance training, which is the phase 2, has a decrease in rest periods. If I go down and I look, that is a differentiator. I don't see that anywhere else in any of these other phases. However, increase the volume of exercises, phase 2. Go to phase 3. Increase the volume of exercises, right? That's phase 3. Phase 4, increase the sets of resistance training, which for the most part, they could have just said the volume, which is just reps times sets, but they're saying increase the sets. That's a similarity. And then do you see it in phase 5? Increase the sets. Could be a similarity. At least that's a similarity between phase 4 and 5. See, all I'm doing is I'm looking through and I'm going, what is similar and what's going to differentiate it? Because if I see a question that asks the following training scenario would be ideal within which phase of training, right? Then they'll give you a list of volume reps and sets, and they'll give you something that's going to demand that you knew what differentiates phase 2 from phase 3. Increase the load or weight of resistance training exercise. So here you have increase the load, increase the load, increase the load, increase the load. You get the idea. Phases 2 through 5 all are demanding that you increase the load. So that's going to be simple and basic similarities. Where are the differences, though? And this is important. So you can increase the complexity of resistance, but you're not going to see increasing the complexity of resistance in phases 4 and 5, but they're the same in 2 and 3. Hope that makes sense. Why? Because by the time you get to phase 4 and phase 5, you don't need to increase the complexity of the exercise. You know, for phase 5, what is the goal of phase 5 training, power training? Rate of force production, increase the load, increase the speed. So what's the differentiator from phase 5 and all the other phases? Speed, repetition, tempo. Again, you know, you're going to see questions that are going to ask or give you a scenario and ask you to really discern between whether it's phase 5 or phase 4. And the only difference that you'll see in the scenario they give you, just as a for instance, or in the answer, is the speed of the exercise. What do you know what's the answer going to be? It's going to be power training. Just so you understand that. So table 21.3, really important table. Keep in mind as you're going through this, reading it, rewriting it, duplicating the chart itself over and over on sheets of paper will help you to memorize the material. Memorization begins the learning process. You've got to get it memorized, so now you can start to utilize it as needed everything you do ultimately should be sort of tested and diagnosed against practice exams and quizzes. Now, look, if you do want more information, for instance, on Body Design University's exam study prep course for the entire NASM textbook, just click right below. There is a link that will take you to it. Much more, much more resources are allocated to helping you study for the NASM exam. Goal is to help you pass it. That is the main focus. By the way, if you are available every Wednesday night, now this is at 7 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. If you're available, we do a exam study. We use Quizlet. If you've ever used Quizlet, it's a great study resources. We create what's known as Quizlet Live, and you can come on board and we have a little competition. You can win $50 if you win the most games in 30 minutes. So 7 to 7:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. You are welcome to come on board. So again, if you have questions or if you want to leave a comment, by the way, if you understood what I was explaining here, if this has helped you in any way, shape, or form, just go ahead and write the word understood in the comment section. Again, we're here to help you to pass the exam. Just let us know how we can assist with you. Have a great weekend. We'll see you next week.